the special edition of the NJC's 10-minute takeaway, where we will try and cram as much information as we can into a 10-minute workshop. I am Tom Stenson, Head of Training and Audit Trainer for the NJC, and today I'm joined by Mike Fowler, who is Senior Trainer for Drive. I knew I'd get it wrong. And on today's subject, we're going to be talking about goals versus needs. So, Mike, our 10 minutes starts now. What's your opinion then, or what's your kind of thought process between goals versus needs? Why have we got those two?
Goals and needs, I think the industry loves the factor of goals and needs.
Yeah.
There's definitely a difference between the two. The first time I spoke at the ADINJC, I'm going back a couple of years now, my thought process was, did the trainer identify the pupil's goals and needs, or the pupil's needs and goals?
Okay.
Where does the split go? And I think a lot of this, especially for the Part 3 test, comes from the lesson either the pupil wants or the instructor wants to deliver. Not necessarily the lesson that the pupil needs.
Yeah.
And the needs is the bit that's massively important so that the pupil's actually got something to take away.
Yeah.
Needs is a very big area. And I think a lot of people boil needs down to simply skills.
Yeah.
So I've seen a lot of PDIs who before now will say, well, yeah, I'm going to do the roundabouts. And okay, what are you doing with the roundabouts? I'm doing all of it.
Yeah.
All of the roundabouts. And I've seen some PDIs who say, well, okay, we're going to use some roundabouts, Tom, but what we're actually doing is we're using those roundabouts to look at judgment, to look at anticipation and planning. And I think, oh, it sounds like a learning need.
Yeah.
We can push this one step further though, because the need isn't always going to be a skill. The need can be an attitude. The need can be an emotion. The need could be feeling less anxious approaching that roundabout. The need could be feeling more confident using multiple lanes. And when we start to really push those boundaries of where those needs are within a driver, we're really starting to hit those higher levels of the GDE matrix, and we're really starting to get into the nitty-gritty of driver training.
And it's interesting you say that, because we kind of, in our industry, we often use different words for things. And I'm going to go the opposite for what you've just said. I say to my trainees that emotions, I'm going to put them under skills, because pupils need to learn how to control their emotions, and that's a skill. Yeah. So if we're putting it under a name, I go, actually, it is one of those skills, because they need to learn how to fight that red mist when somebody pulls out in front of them.
Perfect example.
You know, when they've got their friends in the back, and what strategies have they got to sort of take away from it as well. So you know,
not be subjected to the peer pressure in that environment, because it's quite a different environment, I feel, and I'm not going to give away our age here, Tom, but I feel that the
20s.
average, 21 of course, but I feel that the average, 17, 18-year-old newer driver probably has it a lot different today in 2024 compared to how we had it, because there are a lot of those other factors that essentially come under skills. How are you going to manage? There was the gentleman before who was speaking, I think it might have been last night actually at the event, who said that his son had recently passed his test and he went out and bought a phone holder, and his phone went 30 odd times. That is going to be a skill to manage that. How are you going to manage that distraction? I learned in my life that driving with a small human in the back is a lot different to driving without a small human in the back. And that is a skill I had to learn. That was a learning need for me to work on myself. Could I have gone and got lessons for it? Potentially. Yeah. If it was something more complex, like the anxiety or things that we've seen, emotionally based skills where the skill is controlling that emotion, potentially that would have been the right thing. Yeah. So with the two then, and I think it's really good that we're identifying that we use those words skills or needs and goals. The thing that always crops up for me is that, especially with the needs, people don't know what they don't know. Yeah. So they might not know what they need to do in order to become a safe driver. And that's where we can often step in as professionals and say, great, Fred, your goal is to pass your test, because that's what lots of them do. Let's find out what you're going to need to do in order to do that moving forwards. And it makes me think of a lot of the things we use as instructors, things like scaling, where someone could start off a lesson scaling themselves a 5 out of 10. They could end the lesson scoring themselves a 5 out of 10 and say, now I understand more, now I know more about what my needs are, I know where I need to develop moving forwards. development's still taking place, learning is still taking place, because now the learner in this situation, the client, understands more about what they didn't know.
Yeah.
And now they do know what they don't know. Is it conscious incompetence?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
If we think of the hierarchy of learning, I suppose. So getting them to understand that there are things they don't know, and it's okay that they don't know, because they're not the one with a badge. To sound brutal, they're not the one with a badge, we are, so we're here to help facilitate that.
And ultimately, I think they're probably aware of that, because if they knew what they didn't know, why would they come to us?
Exactly.
So, you know, they've got to have that small amount where they recognise that. Okay, so one of the other ones that often crops up is when we talk about goals, and we want the pupils to try and set the goals. What advice do you give to people when they say, yeah, but all my learners just say, oh, I don't know. I don't know what I want to do today.
The don't know is a fun one, and I always think of the thing of what you want to do. What do you want to do today, Tom? We want to go and get some lunch in a bit. That's what we want to do. It's not necessarily what we need to do. So I always think of putting this whole conversation in context. Imagine you were an examiner in the back of the car who has no clue who you are, no clue who your learner is. How are you?
Yeah.
Talk to me about what we did last lesson. Talk to me about what we've done so far this lesson. How did it go?
Yeah.
What went well? What do we need to improve on? How much help was I giving you? With all of that information that we've just discussed in 3 or 4 minutes, what are our next steps for the lesson? And at that point, the learner is essentially taking responsibility for that.
Yeah, exactly.
But they're also taking an active part in the learning process. And I feel, and I'm going to sound controversial, but I feel, especially with a lot of the 17-year-olds that I've experienced in Manchester, a lot of their education has been sit at this seat, turn to this page, complete this exercise. So when they get in the car with us in 2 tons of metal and we say, what would you like to do? They say, I don't know enough to know what I need to do, which is perfectly acceptable because we are the expert in that paradigm.
And I think you're absolutely right, because I think a lot of the time in mainstream education, when there's a group of 20, 25 people, if the teacher asks them the question, they go, I don't know. The teacher moves to the next one and say, it's like an escape route, isn't it?
But, massively. And sometimes it can be, I don't know because I don't know.
Yeah.
Sometimes it can be, I don't know because I think I know, but I'm not confident enough to say, really. Is that potentially a learning need?
Yeah.
You know, in terms of that confidence, well, what I really want to do today is go and look at that roundabout we did last lesson, but I don't know whether that's what you want me to say.
Yeah.
And that puts it, rapport aside here, that puts the learner in a pretty difficult situation in that lesson. If we're actually targeting their needs rather than what we interpret their needs to be.
And that's why I think the conversation between us and the pupil is just so important, because it just opens up so many different avenues from, like the question you said, you might ask a pupil, what do you want to do today? On its own.
It's massively open and overkill.
It's like, well, actually I want to go sunbathing.
Yeah.
So,
I want to go and make sure my cat's nice and happy.
Yeah. But adding that information in that you used there, which is, what went well last lesson. And if we've already had that previous conversation at the end of the lesson, surely that should have already partly been set up.
A really important point, but even further than that, is let's say you've looked at something like reverse bay parking. And the plan was you finished reverse bay parking last lesson, and today you were going to look at parallel parking. But you don't know whether your pupil's been out driving midweek. You don't know whether their learning need has changed. It could be, last week we did do that reverse bay park, and then I went out and practiced it and I just couldn't get it right. Well, is that now still a learning need? Are we in the correct paradigm now to move on to the next step, the next phase of learning, the next chunk of learning? Or do we want some time to consolidate previously known knowledge to use as a foundation to move into that next step?
Yeah.
And ultimately, without having that conversation, we don't know.
No.
We ask the openly vague question of what do you want to do today? And we think because the pupil said, I want to do the roundabouts. Okay, well, let's do the roundabouts free.
Yeah.
It doesn't work like that. There's a lot more to it. And ultimately, it's a fantastic opportunity to get your learners taking responsibility.
And it ceases to have any development. If a pupil says, my goal is to go and do a roundabout. Well, okay, Fred, we did a roundabout. We nearly died. We nearly killed everyone else, but we did it.
So you have achieved your goal. You've done the thing, just not very well.
Yeah. So how we're going to change that into a more positive thing? What are the needs now that we need to tick off to get to those points? And I think although we're talking about this now, personally as well, I think it just don't overcomplicate things.
The simpler you keep it, the more engaged your pupil will be.
Yeah.
Definitely. And I think allowing that pupil to take ownership of that conversation, to be the one driving that conversation, and we're just facilitating and instructors, ultimately allows them to gain a deeper understanding and a deeper enjoyment of driving lessons ultimately for the pupil and the instructor.
And for me, it's definitely one of those things where if the pupil is enjoying that and they're taking that responsibility and they've got an active role in their learning, they're more inclined to take positives away from that and develop.
Yeah, and I think especially in the realm of driver training, we've got to do that from lesson one.
Yeah.
Because we don't know what their educational background has been, so we've got to set the paradigm from lesson one that they're going to be actively involved. They're going to enjoy it.
So if you can give one bit of information that people can take away from today, what would it be? What would be the advice you could give?
Have the conversation.
Yeah.
Include the context and have the conversation and really allow your learner to recap what they've done before allowing them to decide where they want to start off today's lesson.
Brilliant. Well, that is the end of our 10 minutes. Can I just say thank you very much for joining us today?
My pleasure, Tom.
Brilliant.
Good to see you.
Thanks again.
Take care. All the best, guys.